People say that GURPS is very front-loaded, and that's true. It will take some time and effort to choose the rules you need, but the actual gameplay is very straightforward. Another issue is session preparation, and in my opinion it is as easy as it gets. I have run my share of D&D 3.5 and Pathfinder games, where balancing encounters took a long time due to the specifics of the system. Challenge rating, being a bad measure of monster power, did not help either. Preparing for a game in GURPS is a breeze, especially since you do not have to make it all about combat, and I would like to show it off using one of my relatively recent games as an example. I will tell you what things I had to prepare, how the game progressed, and what rules and trolls came into play. The game was set in Carilon, my fantasy campaign setting, in the nation of Sundan, a collection of coastal cities separated by sandy deserts with several oasis towns. Port Dance, the capital, is ruled by a High Lord elected by the common folk from among the representatives put forward by all the merchant guilds. However, there is also a secretive assassins guild that is pulling the strings from the shadows. The game was planned to be short. Even though I had to run it in the play-by-post format, the entire game took only 220 posts. If I had to run it in real time, that would probably be 2 sessions, maybe even 1. So basically it's a one-shot. I have had 4 players. One was a dune dwarf merchant who possessed an exotic vehicle, a dune sailor. Something of a cart with a sail that could take advantage of the frequent desert winds to move. Good-natured for a dwarf, with a penchant for haggling. The second character was a dwarven mercenary who was earning money by protecting caravans. The third character was a fire elf immigrant pyrokineticist who didn't really have much in terms of personal goals. The most severe disadvantages of his were pyromania and lecherousness. The final character was an Avarial priestess of a draconic deity of fire and destruction, who ran away from her dragon husband. That's a weird character to say the least, but I decided to allow it because I knew the player to be good. The character was impulsive, selfish, and very conscious of her appearance. Her dragon husband was taken as an enemy with a frequency of appearance of 6. I planned to use him as a plot point, but due to the shortness of the game and good luck on the dice rolls, the enemy never appeared. Alas. Also, that's another character that had pyromania. Looking at the skills and disadvantages, I had to come up with situations relevant to driving and repairing a dune sailor, combat, trading, desert survival, lechery, something related to the pact limitation of the priestess, and give 2 of the characters plenty of opportunities to burn things. That doesn't sound difficult, most of these would naturally appear in the adventure. The difficult part was to make flight both useful and not make it solve all the problems. The game started in Port Dance, the capital, in the guild house of the Merchants Guild of Suwon, another city. The guild house head, Arzam Hainul, instructed the player characters on their mission. The mission is simple. They have to travel north towards Suwon to catch up to the caravan of Armat Shane, one of the other merchants of the guild, and deliver him a message that he must return to Port Dance as soon as possible. Obviously, they also have to ensure his safety. The reward is 1,200 GURPS dollars. The reward was intentionally set very low. The characters were expected to haggle. That was appropriate to the local culture. After some haggling and asking additional questions, the reward was raised to 2,800, and the characters learned that Armat Shane has departed the capital 2 days ago on a camel caravan with a small escort. Right now he should be in the oasis town of Mevelon, if the voyage was not interrupted, after which he would set off further north towards Suwon. The merchant character rolled area knowledge to gauge the distance and determine the possible route and how long it would take with favorable winds. Should take about 2 days, it seems. Also, he bought a week-long supply of food, some alcohol, torches and water. In addition, he wrote market analysis. Now that's a skill I would never have thought would come up in my games, to determine what else he can buy to be able to sell profitably in Mevelon, the town they will visit on the way. Borrowing some money from the rest of the party, they bought several pounds of salt. A merchant roll was attempted to haggle with a salt salesman, but with no results. I have to point out that this is a quality of a good player. He was actively finding ways to use his skills and roleplay his disadvantages, instead of passively relying on the GM to remember or, even worse, hoping the GM will forget about certain disadvantages. Running games for such players is a stress-free pleasure. After buying all the goods, the character set off on the Dune Sailor. The merchant driver made a navigation land roll to plot the course. The environment called for some HT or HT-based survival desert rolls to avoid loss of FP due to heat and sunburn. The Avariel was flying high above the ground, where the temperature was lower, and she was protected from heat and sunburn by her divine abilities. Ironically, it's the local dwarves who had to suffer. I allow the players to pick one of the characters who will sit in the sail's shadow, and hence will not lose FP. It was decided that the elf Pyro will be there. Despite decent attributes, the dwarven warrior lost 5 FP due to a heat stroke on a critical failure, and the merchant driver lost 4 FP. About 4 hours after leaving the city, when the sun was already near the horizon, an obstacle was spotted on the way. Due to the Dune sailors being barely able to turn, this might have been a problem. The obstacle in question was a pair of 2 small Dune sailors and a few people standing around. There were multiple options: ram through, perform a difficult maneuver to drive around the obstacle, or to simply stop and remove the obstacle manually. The merchant driver decided to stop and maybe even camp there for the night. After the vehicle was stopped close to the other Dune sailors, it became apparent that one of them is missing a wheel. The 2 men were stranded merchants, or at least they seemed to be, because they might have been robbers, right? They weren't robbers, and the dwarf merchant driver, due to his charitable disadvantage, helped them repair their Dune sailor with a mechanic land sailor roll. After some talking, the 2 stranded merchants told the characters that they have seen the caravan of Armad Shane, who himself seemed to be in a hurry. After having their Dune sailors repaired, they set out for Mevelon, deciding to travel through the chill night. The elf Pyro stood the first watch. His perception was high and he had night vision, but he rolled so poorly that he got surprised by a cryosphinx, a dim-witted, ram-headed male subspecies of the sphinx race. It was looking for a mate, so he simply asked in a broken common language if the elf has seen any female sphinxes around. After receiving a negative response, the sphinx insulted the elf's intelligence and demanded he give all his valuables to him, everything valuable and shiny that female sphinxes like. The elf complied due to being selfless and gave the cryosphinx everything he had, and he never mentioned this encounter to other characters. In the morning, the dwarf merchant driver managed to sell a bottle of wine he bought back in the capital to the dwarf warrior, exploiting his gluttony. The characters continued the voyage north, with the Avariel priestess flying high in the sky and observing the surroundings. A few hours, and HT or HT-based survival desert rolls later, she has spotted another commotion on the way. The same 2 small Dune sailors of the merchant brothers and several camel riders around them. Obviously, those were bandits robbing the merchant brothers, and combat ensued after an attempt at intimidation. 3 area fire blasts, 2 from the flying priestess and 1 from the elf pyrokineticist, were enough to set everything ablaze. The bandits, the camels, the vehicles and friendly merchants. The fight ended quickly due to camels getting spooked and troubles with dousing the fires. Most of the bandits fled, but the ones that did not have any camels at hand surrendered. After the fires were doused, even though one of the small dune sailors got damaged along with most of the cargo, the bandits were relieved of their gear, given water and set free. The merchant driver rolled packing, yes, packing, to rearrange the cargo in a way that the damaged dune sailor could still move, even if barely. This is the only time I have ever seen anyone roll against packing. At last the characters arrived to Mevelon, talked their way out of declaring goods at the customs for taxes, learned from the guards that Armad Shane indeed was there in the morning, separated with the merchant brothers and found an inn to stay. In the morning, the merchant driver went to look for a temple of Moradin or Farlang to donate some of the money taken from the bandits, but he found only an unfinished temple of Farlang. After that, he went to look for the Suon Merchants Guild house. He found the head of the said guild house and asked him if Armad Shane had arrived to check in lately, like he should have. The response was negative, the merchant did not arrive, and there were no plans for him to come to Mevelon. He was supposed to be back in the capital. To find any extra information, the merchant driver went to the northern gates to ask the guards if perhaps Armad Shane had already left the town without checking in at the guild house. He did find out that Armad left in a hurry without stopping in the town for long, but he paid the guards to keep that a secret. The guards had pretty bad acting, so it was easy to find out the truth. In the meantime, both of the elves were at the inn, where they were approached by an unusual patron, a dragonborn of Bahamut. The dragonborn was excited to see the elves because he was looking for someone who knew the elven language. He needed someone to help him translate certain scrolls from Elven. This was something that I planned to create an opportunity to roleplay the priestess's intolerance towards any metallic draconic creature that was part of her pact limitation on her abilities. The other part was disciplines of faith, ritualism. None of these disadvantages were roleplayed properly, and she helped the Dragonborn. When I later took away her divine powers, the player suddenly lashed out and threw a fit, claiming that it was my job to notify him when and how he should have roleplayed these disadvantages. This argument might have stemmed from the player in question not being very familiar with the setting and the power modifier rules, so I told him that I will notify him if he is about to transgress in the future. He didn't leave the game, but I think he will not apply for any of my future games. Due to real-life circumstances, the elf pyrokineticist player had to drop out of the game, so I decided to organically remove the character by exploiting his lecherousness. He found a fling and basically abandoned the mission to the displeasure of his comrades. Finally, the party set out north to catch up with Armad Shane's caravan. It took 1.5 days, but they did it. The situation, however, was very unfavorable. The Avarial priestess was flying very high up in the sky, and the ongoing sandstorm was blocking the vision. The caravan was ambushed by assassins hidden in the sand, some of whom were using guns to scare the camels and kill the caravan guards. The priestess had to die for almost 15 seconds to enter combat, and she did it when it was almost over. I felt bad for the dwarf warrior player. He landed a good hit, then rolled a critical failure that broke his axe, and he had weapon bond with it, then rolled a critical failure that unraided his shield, and then took a lot of damage. Despite that, both the dwarves and the remaining caravan guards managed to slay the assassins. The fight lasted a long time, and that was entirely my fault. The sandstorm and loose sand on the ground imposed heavy penalties, so most of the attacks were telegraphic. These penalties applied to everyone on both sides, so what was the point? If I were to run this fight again, I would roll 1d to determine the severity of the penalty imposed by the sandstorm, and another 1d to determine the duration in seconds, after which I would roll again and again. This would create a more dynamic environment. The fight ended with one of the assassins taking Armad Shane hostage. However, he had nowhere to run, so he slit the merchant's throat and, of course, was slain by the party. The injury was major, but the party had a healing potion that stopped the bleeding that otherwise would have surely been fatal. When Armad Shane regained consciousness, he was given the notice by the party. The notice said that he was elected to be the High Lord of Sanden, and has to return to Port Dance as quickly as possible. Armad knew about this. He explained that the Assassin's Guild is behind his so-called promotion, and that he is fleeing the country to escape the fate of being the guild's puppet. He offered the party some money to let him go instead of returning him to the capital, and the party agreed. So they didn't actually finish their quest, but they saved Armad, even though they also painted a target on their backs, as some of the assassins have escaped. And that was the end of the game. So how much did they have to prepare? I only had the general events in mind when I started the game. I did not have a railroad plot. For example, the fact that Armad Shane survived, thanks to the healing potion, was completely unplanned. When he got his throat slit, I just thought, oh well, I guess he'll die, and I will work out the repercussions of this and continue the story based on this. I absolutely forgot about the healing potion, so it sort of ended the game a bit prematurely, but I was absolutely fine with that. The story had its resolution. In terms of stat blocks, the Creo Sphinx wasn't used in combat, but if he were, I would just pull the stats from my blog. And the rest, the bandits, the assassins, and the caravan guards, that's 3 stat blocks. And remember that in GURPS you only need to know the relevant statistics. You do not need the entire character sheets for everyone. So these stat blocks were created in about a minute or 2 each. For example, Strength 13, Dexterity 11, IQ 10, HT 11, Broadsword 14, Shield 14. Done! Prep work for GURPS games is incredibly easy compared to D&D or Pathfinder in my experience. As far as the rules are concerned, I had to look up the flight rules, area attack rules, burning, and mounted combat rules. That's not a lot, and the rules are not very difficult. Overall, I have enjoyed the game a lot, despite a few hiccups, and I hope that I showed you that being a GM is not as intimidating as it might seem. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.